as we've mentioned, this is a very lucky chance to speak to Carl this morning. But just by way of context, for everyone really, and by way of introduction, what we're doing here is we've done sort of a 3-week block, Carl, with third-year journalism students. So these guys are all chomping at the bit to try and find their first job, particularly in this difficult climate of COVID. And what we did last week was really try to orientate them around this big 5 group of publishers: JPI, Archant, NewsQuest and Reach, and then say, look, they're gobbling up kind of 70% of the market with the ownership of so many titles. But then there's a really vibrant independent sector as well, quite often associated with the ICNN, so the Independent Community News Network, where you've got 400 or so standalone sites, usually run by one person or a handful of people. So again, a very lean model, but no scope for scale. Now I see Nub News, and as you know, I've been heavily involved in this sector as well for the last 10 years. What I see in Nub News is something really special, because it's trying to promote independence and grassroots journalism, but hopefully with a model that can scale. So by way of introduction for everybody, Carl, would you be so kind as to very brief, obviously they've read up the background, but in your own words, just a very brief introduction of the vision for Nub News would be great.
Okay, I went to stop, so don't feel rude or anything like that by interrupting me, because I will go on. Okay, my background is, I'm not a journalist, and I'm just checking you can hear me okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah, okay, good. So my background is not a journalist. I've been in the city for 26 years of my life, living in London as a stockbroker. I've worked for Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, and Berenberg. And a couple of years ago, we had a bit of a university reunion. I was at Cardiff University, coincidentally, nothing connected with journalism, and our football team had a reunion, and a friend of mine came up to me with a proposal and said, look, I've got an idea for local news. Would you like to invest in it? And I said, local news, the business model's broken. All the companies are going bust. Archant's just been wiped out. JPI went bust. There's no money in local news. Anyway, explain the business model, how it was hyper local, how it was low cost, and I liked it. I then took the business model, went back to my investors, seriously important investors in the city who run billions of pounds and invest in these type of companies, and asked them, look, I said, am I mad to be leaving a well-paid job in the city to launch what is a local news company? They loved it. Not only did they love it, but they offered to invest in it as well. That was in January last year. And since then, we've had 3 fundraisers with high-profile investors, and we've grown from 3 towns in Devon, where we launched, to 54 towns today. And the real issue, just describing what Nub News is, as you all know, there's huge closure and consolidation in the local news industry. Papers are being closed, and the incumbents have resorted to CPM, which is getting paid for Google ads, clicks every time someone clicks on, and it's resulted in a couple of things. One, local news has become regionalized. So in some areas of the country, you don't get papers anymore. You don't get hyper local news. It's going to be something like Devon Live or Cheshire Live. And when I go onto my local newspaper and Crew, I see news from Warrington, from Frodsham, from Knutsford, and none of it is local. So there's a big demise on hyper local news. And then secondly, when you do go onto the website, you get bombarded with Google ads, clickbait, pop-up surveys, and it's just not a very pleasant read. So we needed to come up with something which was 1, hyperlocal, 2, a pleasant read, and that's what Nub News is. It was 4 years in the making. My co-founder, Dean Waghorn, is a computer programmer, and what we deliver is Nub News. And so, it's low cost for 3 reasons. 1, The journalist writes the stories. We have journalists in all of our towns. The journalist writes the story and publishes straight away. So you're not waiting for the weekly to be printed and putting lots of stories all at the same time. We write and publish, just like Google, just like Twitter, just like Facebook, etc. Secondly, it's low cost because we go into the communities and speak to all the key people in the town, like Chamber of Commerce, the members of Parliament, sports teams, etc. And we ask them to write for us as well. We call them trusted contributors. And the third reason it's low cost is that we aggregate some of the functions of a local newspaper, be it classified, property, or jobs, but we always direct it to make sure it's important for that town. So if there's one big change in the local news landscape, 25 years ago, everything was very town-centric. If you wanted to reach your local town, you went via your local newspaper. Then with the internet came along Rightmove, eBay, Facebook, Google, Amazon, and these were all product-centric solutions which were a better offering than the local newspaper. But what's really happened in the last 2 to 3 years is that globalization, that product-centric view has changed and has gone back to being more local, more community, more supporting the high street, charities, etc. And what the COVID and the crisis has done really in the last few months is accelerate that, let's call it localization. And that's the trend that Nub News is really embarking on, really, is giving, we call our catchphrase is your town in your pocket. So everything that's going on in your town, from news to obituaries to gossip to what's on to buy and sell, we want people to come onto our mobile phone and see what's going on in their town. And that's where we are at the moment. Was that a
brilliant? Yeah, no, that's absolutely fantastic. So just to summarize for the benefit of everybody, what Carl offers is a paid journalism job. So there's our paid journalism that is given a patch. So that is, an employee, just like you would be with Reach. So you are a paid journalist. Now that is what I call the human kind of centered journalism. So you would be doing, that's journalism in a traditional sense. But what you are complemented with is almost the robot journalism. So the robot journalism is these aggregated open APIs where there is information being scraped automatically from local adverts, local classified, eBay, job listings, property listings, all those kind of things that you almost like don't need to be worried about because they're being aggregated in. So of those two building blocks, and then the third block, which is to say that there's these trusted contributors. So perhaps it's the local sports team, perhaps it's the local councillor, but giving them an opportunity to produce content for the platform, but it will be verified and checked by you. So it's not, they're not allowed to just post it without you having looked at it. So those are the three main building blocks that keep it really low cost. So if we take each one separately, in terms of the aggregated content it's Zoopla, who else, and also just sort of how reliant are you there on open APIs and algorithms and things like that? Just explain that mod bit first.
Yeah, we're not reliant on it at all, really. We use that for local content. Eventually, we would want to put our own content in. So if you take our property section, we API with Zoopla. So you'll see everything. If it's Honiton, Nub News, you'll click onto our property. All the latest houses for sale, which are listed on Zoopla, all related to Honiton, will be on there. So that's what we use for Zoopla. But eventually, we'll partner with estate agents, and estate agents can then put their own content and inventory onto our sites. If you go onto classified, that's linked to eBay. It's super fast, super quick. It's actually quicker than eBay. And you go on there and you can just click on the buttons, whether it's cars, laptops, PCs, vans, etc. And within milliseconds, you'll see what cars are available in your town, i.e. within a couple of miles of where you live. Now, eventually, if this becomes bigger and bigger, then eBay will actually pay us money for their referrals because they like what we're doing, because we're offering more customers to their site. But again, eventually, once we're more mature, there's nothing stopping the people of Honiton and all our towns from inputting their buy and sell directly, free of charge, because it's all about content, really, at the end of the day. And it's the same for jobs as well. We go to read the jobs agency, and all the jobs in the local area are on there live, and people can see them. So it's giving the local audience at their fingertips, without typing in postcodes or towns, everything they need for their town. And what we're seeing on jobs, and you asked about how reliant on we are, we're now getting approached by lots of companies in our towns to advertise jobs. So they're putting their jobs directly onto Nub News. So we're complementing that aggregated service with our own service as well, and we get paid for that, obviously.
Brilliant. So in terms of the journalistic input, what in your experience has proved to be really good stories, or what kind of quality content have you seen work well?
Yeah, so this is an education process for me, and I've learned a lot over the last 18 months, but I'm pretty certain I know now what succeeds. And what succeeds in our towns is unique, local, original content that you can't get elsewhere. So that might be a feature on a shop. It might be, the roadworks happening down the high street. But, I tell my journalists when I recruit them, 70% of your work, 70% of your articles has to be that local original content. We have something called an up close feature, where we go to a local business or sports team or a community, and we write it up in detail, up close with. That works incredibly well. So that works. I'll tell you why it works, because we've seen it in evidence over the last 18 months. We've got two towns at Nub News. One of them's our best town, and one of them's our worst town. And our best town is Penarth, just outside Cardiff. When the journalist started, all she did was write her own content. So there was no council PR, there was no police PR, there was no traffic, there was no council. It was all original content. And consequently, Google liked that. And obviously the people in Penarth like that. And her Google traffic is 15 times better than average of all our other towns. So if there were no articles published tomorrow in Penarth, then 1,500 people would still come onto our site, because they're used to going onto it, they Google it, they've bookmarked it, etc. And that's because she wrote original local articles on Penarth and what was going on in Penarth, not Cardiff or South Wales, but Penarth. Contrast that to Exmouth, which is our first town, a bit bigger, but when we were first starting off, we did a lot of work with the council, copy and paste material from the police, breaking news, etc. And as a result of that, Google didn't like it, because it was a lot of copy and paste, and there was no brand built in Exmouth. So tomorrow in Exmouth, if there are no stories published, then we would get hardly any traffic coming into us. Tells me, after 18 months of looking across all our 54 towns, unique, local, original content is absolutely critical, and by far the #1 priority in terms of our content strategy.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Carl. You're whistling through so much information. It's very, very rich terrain for everybody, and I'm sure they'll have lots of questions. Just as we start to think a little bit more detail now about the business side of things, but just to start that off, just in general, what have you, just your takeaway, is the biggest challenge really that local independent news is facing, and whether that's from audience consumption, visibility, the business model, kind of what are the biggest challenges?
There's two challenges, and they're both connected to each other. The first challenge is local businesses, your fish and chip shop, your local car dealer, your funeral parlor, your estate agent, all of these that used to advertise in your local paper no longer advertise in your local paper. The money has disappeared by 90% over the last 20 years. They rely on Facebook, they rely on Google, and they rely on, obviously, Rightmove, Amazon, eBay, all of these better product solutions. So that the money going into local news has evaporated, and that's why all of these papers, Reach, JPI, Archer, and Newsquest are all struggling. So you need a low-cost solution to that. There is still money there, and we're going after it, and we're getting it. But connected, so that's by far the biggest problem. Connected to that, though, is okay. So we've got the issue now of 54 towns. We want to be in 700 towns across the UK. If we're getting that money from the local care home or the local solicitor or the local garden centre, how do we scale that up in a way across all our towns and all our regions? Because you can't have a salesperson for each town. It's just not affordable anymore. If you look at Reach and JPI, they've got hundreds and hundreds of salespeople which are just not getting those revenues anymore. And that's why you're seeing all of these redundancies. So my biggest challenge, literally right now, and I've just started it over the last few weeks, is we know what the solution is. We know the type of people that want to advertise. We know the product we're offering them and why it's differentiated from Reach. We've got all that, but how do you scale it up? How many salespeople per region? Can one salesperson do the Northwest, Northeast? The good news is it's a very daunting task at the very beginning, but once you start making a few sales, then it becomes easier. It becomes incrementally easier, because once you've got one solicitor on board, you can use that as a test study and go into other solicitors. Garden centres the same, healthcare, care home companies or care at home companies, all of these high ticket items. We've got lots of evidence now of them sponsoring our towns across different towns in the UK. So it becomes easier, but we still haven't solved the scalability of that revenue collection.
I would add something into the mix, if I could be so bold, just from my own kind of knowledge as well here, is when, and you hit the nail on the head, that I'm sure everyone here listening to you will understand. If I've got a local sweet shop here in Kirkby Stephen, she is more than capable of pushing out her offers, her pictures on Instagram. She pushes out her little, I've got this offer on, or I've got the changed open tab. This is what we're doing during COVID. She's more than capable of doing that, and she has her own audience in this very local area. So I hope everyone can see that the local paper in that role has become quite redundant, because she's got direct to audience. She doesn't need the local paper to do that. So there's one other thing that I would add to Carl, and that I have seen a lot of potential. It's where there's a creativity to that messaging that she wouldn't be able to achieve on her own. So yes, she'll have grasped how to do a photograph on Instagram, and yes, she'll know how to do a post on Facebook. But if I could come along and actually offer her a more creative messaging service, whether that's a fly through her her sweet shop with a drone, or offering her some really quirky competition where I'm going to get a special Santa Claus delivery of her sweets to the local children's shop, and I'm adding an advertising messaging solution in a creative way that she would never have thought about, and she might be prepared to pay me for that. Now that's one thing I have seen that is working really well, when we can add value to the messaging. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, Carl.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. But again, it's how we differentiate ourselves. We're nimble, we connect with our sponsors, we connect with the town. There's two areas to that, and one is two types of advertising. The first one is we do give them brand. Yes, they have got their Facebook, they've got their Twitter, etc. But if you're a solicitor in Midsummer Norton or Radstock or even Honiton, and you're our main sponsor in our news section. Now, Honiton's a town of 14,000 people. We get every month probably 20,000 people coming onto our site, at least 20,000 people on Honiton, and they probably read about 70 to 80,000 pages. Now, if your solicitor's sponsor logo is at the top of every article, being seen 70,000 times a month, that will have a link to your website as well. So the branding element is there, and it's a highly targeted audience of people that live and work and care about their town, and that's a really important message, and a cheaper message for that solicitor to get embedded in that town. That's the branding element that you talked about, where I think we can differentiate ourselves. But the second element, and which is what you led on to, is much more important. It's the content editorials as well as the competitions, but we can, or they can write articles that we can publish. Now, it's not like, let's call it sponsored editorials. It's not so much sponsored advertising. It's proper local interest story. So if it's a solicitor, it might be about the housing market. It might be one of their employees have been at the firm for 30 years. It might be anything to do with that solicitor, which is newsworthy and content worthy, but obviously it's written about them, and their message and their brand gets out through content editorials, and that's a big part of what we do, whether it's a care home, whether it's a solicitor, or, like you say, offers like garden centres. It might be Christmas trees are coming in and we'll do a Christmas tree offer, which we did last year. Or it might be their garden centre has a cafe and you can have a free coffee before 10:30. So we can be part of that solution in terms of content editorials or as part of their social media campaign.
And you charge for those advertorials, do you?
It will become, it's all part of the sponsorship package. So we sponsor,
right.
The way our revenues work is we'll charge individually for job adverts. But at the moment, if you become a sponsor of our news section, you get all of that for free, i.e. the branding and the editorials. It's the same for all the other sections as well. So we don't charge per article. I don't think that would be worthwhile, but it becomes part of the overall package.
I think just to bring all that together before we just head on to one or two more questions and we'll leave you in peace. But just to bring all that together by way of summary, what are the main revenue streams then that Nub News is relying on?
So the first and biggest one is you can sponsor the news section. So if you go on to Radstock Nub News, town of 8,000 people, it's sponsored by a company called Thatcher and Hallam. They're solicitors and they sponsor 3 of our towns. So that's the bulk of the revenues right now for Radstock Nub News. Eventually, every one of our sections will be sponsored. So news, what's on, local lists, classified, property, obituaries, which is a big part of local news and what we're doing right now. We've just signed up 10 funeral parlours around the country, which may sound like small fry, and they pay us money to sponsor their obituary section, but obituaries are a big part of local news. People like reading about them, and the funeral parlours get good branding when they sponsor our obituary section. So we get content and revenues, and they get branding, and that's working incredibly well. And then the third area is we've signed a national deal with the Co-op. The Co-op are all about community, all about giving money to local causes. So we're trialing in 15 towns right now, launching on Friday actually, and creating a community section on our websites, which will be paid for by the Co-op.
I've shared with the students one of the examples of Co-op Talk. I think it's a really good example. That's fab. Okay, last couple of questions from me. The first one being, what audience research do you rely on? Is it just Google Analytics, News Consumer Insights? And what does that tell you about your audience? So where are you getting your insights from about your audience, and what do you know about your audience?
We could do much better here. And so this is probably an area of improvement, but we rely at the moment on Google Analytics. All I care about at the moment when we're growing our towns is the number of different people coming into our town. So it's not about overall reach and getting as many clicks as possible. It's making sure that 30% of the town's population are coming onto our site regularly. And when I get to 30%, I know that I can then go out and get sponsorships. So we initially target 30% of a town's population coming onto our site every week, 75% every month, and eventually we want obviously 50% plus to be coming on our site every single day. And when that happens, the rates that we charge our sponsors will be much higher. And we use Google Analytics for lots, how many page views they do, where they come from, Facebook, direct, Google, etc. Google customer is 10 times more valuable than a Facebook customer. They look at more pages. They stay on the site much longer. So they're very
Sorry,
valuable.
which one? Google or Facebook?
A Google acquired customer is much more valuable than a Facebook acquired customer. And at the moment, 60% of our customers or readers come via Facebook, and 40 via Google and direct.
Interesting. That's really interesting. Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. I'm sure hopefully we'll be able to offer some feedback on there. And the areas you're most interested in expanding to next, you've got 54 towns, and I know you're trying to consolidate a little bit now after this last round of investment. But if there are areas that you're thinking, oh, quite fancy this next patch, where would that be?
Okay, it's a two-pronged attack to our growth. We'll go anywhere really. If the important thing is the journalist has to be right. They have to live and care about their town. And the town has to be right. So is the town neglected of news? Has the local newspaper closed down? Is the local weekly paper part of a that doesn't really get the news? So if you get those two right, I will go into that town. Ideally, though, I would then overlay that with our existing pods. And our existing pods at the moment are East Devon, Somerset, South Wales, Cheshire, Lincolnshire, and the East Midlands, Essex, and then Southwest London and Surrey are prime targets. Southwest London, we're in Teddington, we're going to be in Twickenham and Kingston, Tooting, Ealing, Richmond, all of those areas all rely on London news rather than hyper-local news. So Southwest London and Surrey, I think, are real good target areas for us. But like I say, we're open to hiring anybody, anywhere, as long as the journalist is right and the town is right.
So what I'm going to be doing, just while I let everyone gather their thoughts and prepare a question, I'll just, so you've come up to Cheshire, but I know you've muted Yorkshire as well, but we do have exactly the same issues up here, of course. Even where I live here in the Lake District, I have a couple of local newspapers that are just got nothing to do with where I live whatsoever, and it's quite interesting that coming back, which Facebook, but is as well. But he's done what you said. He's got this reputation now of when you want to know what's going on, he always seems to be able to fill that patch. He's really good. So thank you so much for your time, Carl, so far. I'm going to see if anyone's brave enough to switch on their audio and ask you a question, which I very much hope they will. So open to the floor for questions. Just put your hands up.
Oh, sorry. Can you?
If you put your hand up first, and then I'll know who wants to speak. Right, Katie. Katie, are you all right to unmute your microphone? Thanks, Katie.
Hello. I was just wondering, Carl, what do you really look for when you're hiring a journalist for one of your towns? Are there any kind of particular skills that they would need to have in order to do well?
Yes. When I hire people, I look for three things. One, are they smart? Two, can they get on with people? And three, do they work hard? And I think that could go for every industry, really. When I've hired a lot of people in the city, and I it then, and then I overlay that with obviously journalism, and then ask them, the real issue is, do they care? Do they care about their town? Do they understand their town? Do they know what drives their town? I've got 600 CVs in my inbox right now that I'm still plowing through, because lots of people are looking for jobs with no news. And when I speak to some of them, if they get through, if I look at their CV, and they finally get an interview with me, I will ask them about their town. I will ask them about the competition. And if they don't know anything about that or the competition, then they don't really get through, because it just tells me that they're just applying for a job rather than actually caring about where they live, where they want to cover, etc. And that, I'd probably say that's by far the biggest hurdle. I can almost see that in the cover letters that people write to me. If they don't write anything about their local town or the local competition, it'd be very rare for me to sort of like get back and say, let's have an interview.
Well, you'll be pleased to know, Carl, that's exactly what they're working on with me over the next week. So I will hopefully have some pitches for you by the end of next week. We've got brilliant. Thank you so much for your participation, guys. We've got 4 questions. Sophie was next. So Sophie Williams, would you go next, please?
I was just wondering, like a lot of, obviously your news is tailored to online, so how do you like drum up support for those audiences that like engage heavily with like traditional news formats and things?
Sorry, is the question, how do we get customers really? How do we get readers?
Yeah, like, you know, like older generations, how do you sort of like target them to come to your sites?
We don't target specific areas. Obviously, local news is more people. It's the older generation. 60% of our people on our websites are over the age of 40 or over the age of 45. A lot of people in the age, I'm 52, and I'm fully aware of Twitter and Facebook. My brother's 60, and he's very tech savvy. So anybody up to 50, 60, even 70 are fully aware of computers now. And the way we target, the way we get customers is initially, there's 3 ways. Firstly, contacts. Journalists will go into the town and tell everybody about Nub News. That's the biggest way, by word of mouth. Secondly, it will be through Facebook communities. So we do our own Facebook page and then share that into Facebook communities, which are not very nice and not very pleasant. So we try to be the polar opposite of them, but we get them away from there onto our Facebook and onto our site. And then there's Google, obviously, and various different ways. And we're just about to, if anybody's heard of Nextdoor, we're launching a trial with Nextdoor starting today, actually. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a great question. Well done, Sophie. I was going to ask you about Nextdoor. So are you kind of seeing them as a complement to what you do? Because it never really took off in the north of England, if I'm honest. We got, certainly in my area, we got them all through our door, but and there was loads of like WhatsApp chats in the village. What is it? Should we be doing this or not? And then in the end, everyone was just like, yeah, no, let's forget about it, sort of thing. But yeah, you're seeing that as a complement to what you do.
Yeah, I think they're very metropolitan. 1 in 3 households in Richmond and Tooting already are connected up on Nextdoor. And what they are is a trusted, more, safe version of the Facebook communities, because everybody knows each other. Everybody gives their details. They're less likely to cause arguments and abuse each other. And that's what Nextdoor is trying to do, and at the hyper local level. So if we trial with them in Richmond, where we just launched Nub News a couple of months ago, they'll give us massive distribution. But what they get out of it is engagement. We put our stories on. They want people to remain in their platform, talking to each other, engaging with each other. And if our content can stimulate that conversation, then it works well. I don't know how successful. I'm in Devon, and not many people are on Nextdoor at all. So what I do know is they're just about to IPO in the US. They're very successful in the US. They've got a lot of money and they are growing in the UK. But I agree with you, at the moment, it's mainly metropolitan areas, and they're going out to the country right now. So I think we'll hear more about them over the next few years.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, Sandra, over to you next.
Hi. I was wondering, how do you go about representing a smaller part of a city? Because I feel like the area that I'm from is being affected by newspaper bias. South Bristol. Bristol Live doesn't comment a lot about South Bristol unless it's really negative, but I think there's a lot of positive news to say about South Bristol. Everything that they talk about, whether it's negative or positive, tends to be about central Bristol and north of Bristol and Gloucester, but they very rarely talk about South Bristol. So would that be a potential area for you?
Absolutely. There's two things there. One, in the past, crime pays. So you put a crime story up, it gets lots and lots of viewers. That's not us. We're a good newspaper. We want to promote the community, we want to promote the towns, and we want to promote the high street and businesses. If there is crime, we'll report on it. We have to, of course, but we won't chase it and we won't write it up salaciously. It's not what we're about. Well, that's the first thing. The second thing is there's nothing stopping us going into South Bristol. What we do is we're about identity. You know, is there an identity in South Bristol? If you look at, if you compare that to London, London is served by My London, Get Surrey, both Reach newspapers. It's got the Richmond and Twickenham Times, but I spent the last 25 years of my life in Teddington in southwest London. It's a nice suburban town on the river with a great high street. It has not got a paper, therefore it has not got a voice or an identity. We come along and launched Teddington 6 months ago, and within a couple of months, 40% of the population are coming onto our website every week. And if you look at the articles, 25 articles, 30 articles a week, it's all about Teddington. It won't be about Richmond. It won't be about Twickenham. It'll be about what's going on in Teddington. And only, I would say, 10 to 15% of those stories, probably less, I don't know the numbers, are about crime. It's about shops. It's about high streets, about Bushy Park, a lot of COVID-related stuff. And that's a big issue as well. The COVID message nationally is not getting heard locally. And what we do and what local newspapers do, we can really get down to the granular level in our towns. What does COVID mean? Where is the COVID test centre? When is it opening? What is happening? And I'm working with, and we're talking to the government actually about that message and how deep it's getting, how well it's being understood. Obviously, we know there's a lot of confusion out there, but yes, to answer your question, there is I tell my journalists, if you're writing on Richmond or Teddington, then you will stick to Richmond. I don't want to see anything about Twickenham or other areas or London. I want it to be about Richmond. And the big thing here about Nub News is about trust. I tell my journalists, I don't want anyone to be any of our readers to ever be disappointed whenever they click on a headline and read one of our stories. If that's the case, then they'll keep coming back. And that's on, I wouldn't call it a mission, but that's a big thing that I put to my journalists. They cannot be disappointed. I see it so many times. Devon is a county of it's 8,700 square kilometres, and I see, sorry to slag off Reach, but Devon Live traffic accident or something here or something. It could be 50 miles or 2 hours away from where I live. It's clickbait. And that disappoints me, and it makes me reluctant to go onto the website again. That doesn't happen at Nub News. People that come onto Richmond will know it's about Richmond and not Twickenham.
Thank you.
That's absolutely true, and I think the takeaway for you there, Sandra, is absolutely a small area within the city can definitely have a strong enough identity to support a Nub site. It's Bridget next.
Are you okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, just about.
Yeah, I was just wondering, when I looked on the website at the different regional editors, there wasn't many in northern areas. Have you struggled to sort of expand in northern areas, or is it just something that you haven't really focused on yet?
We haven't focused on it yet. It's me hiring people and moving around the country. I don't hire people without meeting them. In fact, actually, we've just hired the first person. We've made a landmark hiring. We've hired a person in Frodsham in Cheshire. That's the first person we've hired without me meeting them. Obviously, we did Zoom calls and all of that. It's just me getting around the country, really, in Lancashire and Yorkshire. I'd love to. There are so many towns in Lancashire and Yorkshire that are crying out for a local news service. Our ideal town is 10 to 40,000 population. And if you think about them, there's loads in between Leeds and Bradford and Manchester, all of that. And I get lots of CVs. So Yorkshire and Lancashire is a big area of growth for me when I get the time.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much. Bethany, and then it will be Fatima.
Hiya. How often do you expect for content to be put out when it comes to journalism? Do you expect something each day or each week?
That's a really good question, and something I've struggled with for 18 months, knowing what the right answer is. And I actually ask in interviews, how many articles do you think you can write? The truth is, there's no correct answer generally in terms of the number of the articles. What I say now, what I've realised is, I think one town only needs one good article about their town every day. You know, I'm not saying feature length article, but a decent length article. And if you think about that, that's 7 days. If you were to open your local weekly paper on a Thursday and you saw 7 decent stories in there about your town, that would be quite good content. So the answer, you know, I tell my journalists, there need to be at least one decent, unique, local, original article in their town. And then you can that will build your brand. And then you can overlay that with, you know, content from the PR, from the police appeals, from the traffic. You know, that won't dilute your brand. If that's all you do, then you won't have a brand. But yeah, I think 1 a day, maybe 1.5 a day, is all you need.
Okay, thank you so much.
And last but not least, Fatima.
Hiya. You mentioned before that you work with businesses. Is there an expectation generally to differentiate stories and PR hand in hand for your platform?
I missed that, sorry.
With working with businesses, is there an expectation for your journalists to differentiate between stories and PR, or do they work hand in hand for your platform?
They do. It's hand in hand. The good journalists will know how to take that PR content and make it proper content for their town. The last thing we want to do is splash lots of PR across our website. It does nothing for the brand. It doesn't build the brand. And you know, our audience are not stupid. They know what's a real story and what's not a real story. You know, the way the industry's going is, if I was a company now, I would be employing someone, a journalist for my company, creating proper content and then building my brand like that and using the newspapers and elsewhere. So it's sort of like it's merged a little bit between actual, obviously sponsored PR and proper news articles. And those content editorials, getting those right are absolutely key. But, you know, like I say, the main message is 70% of a journalist's job has to provide, you know, they have to write those unique, local, original articles.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Carl. There is one more question, I promise, and then we'll leave you alone. Chloe.
Hi, thank you. I've noticed that you're planning on opening 700 sites on your website in the next couple of years. Do you plan on doing that with your current business model?
Sorry, say that again.
So I've noticed you're opening 700 sites up in the next couple of years. I'm just wondering how you plan on doing that.
With a lot of effort. Up until now, it's been me, my tech guy, and a sales guy. We've run the company, we've built the company up. That's why I'm starting to create pods in Cheshire, in Southwest London, in Essex, and I'm going to rely on those senior reporters around the country to help me build up a network of journalists and a network of towns. Obviously, I can't do that all on my own. But yeah, it's relying, it's building a team around me that understand Nub News, how to grow, how to, you know, spot the best town, how to be a journalist, and rely on them to sort of like grow the network out exponentially.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You there, Claire?
Yeah. So there we are. That brings us to the end. Carl, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure everybody will join me in spending lots of time on this. We're going to on a little project now in groups, and what I'm going to get them to do is really look at proposing either a new site or revenue streams to an existing site. But I'll work with them on that for the next week, and if they're of interest to you, we can kind of flag up how we perhaps see any potential new areas for you. But thank you so much for your time. We're really grateful, and we wish you all the best with Nub News. And I will obviously write this up on Medium as well. But thank you so much.
Thanks, Claire, and thanks very much, everyone, and thanks for your questions. Don't hesitate to get in touch if you need anything at all.
Thanks, Carl. If everybody else could stay on the call, and we'll say goodbye to Carl. Thank you so much.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Wow, well done. I'm so sorry. That was kind of very much from a standing start. I'm extremely grateful for all of those questions and your attention. I feel like this whole business 3 weeks has come out of nowhere. I feel like I haven't had chance to even explain to you what the whole thing is meant to be about, because I lost the kind of introduction slot last week because of the Ed Walker panel. Carl was only meant to come on at 9:15, but he was there straight away at 9 o'clock. So if I can propose, let's walk away, let's just stay on this call, but just mute whatever, let's go and get a drink. And then what I'd really like to do is come back at 10 o'clock and start at the beginning, which I think would be a really valuable thing to do. So if it's okay with you, we're going to just, I'll stop the recording, but we'll just stay on the call, go and get a drink, go and just stretch your legs, and we'll come back at 10 o'clock. All right, I'll speak to you very soon, 10 o'clock.